Steve Matthes, 2000 Mount Morris 125 class mechanic to the stars. I get a lot of questions about throttle cables and throttle actions on 4-strokes. As you know, he has a push and a pull, and be it carbureted or fuel injection, the throttle cable system remains the same. Well, this week on Transworld How To, presented by Bike Bandit, I'm going to take you through a replacing of throttle cable on one of these new modern 4-strokes. Stick around, I bet you'll learn something. Alright, first place you want to start when you're going to redo your throttle cable is appropriately enough at the throttle housing. A little trick you can do, just go down to your local hardware store, replace these Phillips screws that come stock with some bolts that have an 8mm head on them. Just make sure you get the same length. Get an 8mm head on them, and that way you won't strip them out, and they'll last longer. That was something that we pretty much did automatically on a lot of the bikes I worked on. And then take your throttle housing off, and we'll go through cleaning that. Also, you're going to need your seat off and your tank off, so let's get busy. Alright, seats off, disconnected the fuel line. On some of the EFI bikes, you can just pull the tank aside to get to it. This one's carburetor. I'm going to take this right off. Probably a good idea to do on the carbureted bikes. Turn your fuel nozzle down on your carburetor so nothing falls in there. As well, take one of your bolts, stick it in your fuel line like so nothing gets in there as well. Okay, so now I've got the carburetor exposed and the cables to come off, and you can see these bolts over here on the carburetor. 2 throttle cables, carburetor cover is off, 2 throttle cables, 1 push, 1 pull. Keep those separate, and you'll notice the bottom one has a adjuster nut on it, so you know where to put it back in, and the top one is there. And just get in there and break them loose. You can do it with these new bikes with the aluminum frames. Lots of room in there, fair amount anyways. Alright, I've broken that adjuster, slide it off, reach in there, pull the cable like so, and this one will just unscrew. Once you have that one, and you have some play in your cable, you can get in there. Excuse me, camera. Alright, there you go. The push and the pull have been taken off. Now pay special attention to how your cable is routed. Some of them go up here in the radiators, in between the radiators and the frame. Some of them go on top of the radiators. Some of them go in here and on this side of the number plate. Whatever it is, however it is, pay special attention to how your cable is routed, because the new cable you're putting on, you're going to want to do exactly the same thing because they're made for certain lengths. So this one comes out over here. You can see we've got an hour meter on there. We need to disconnect. Pull it up this way. Yamaha's got a cool little holder. Just bend that out. There you go. Here's your old throttle cable. And again, pay special attention to how it was routed. Let's install the new one. Alright, down in here, you can see there's 2 Allen key bolts holding this carb cover on, as well as a couple 12mm nuts for the throttle cable. So that's going to come off next. And I think I can leave the carburetor all attached and get down in there and reach those. Alright, cables removed. Let me clean this bar off really good. We're going to grease that up. Now, we spoke about in an earlier how to lube your clutch cable. I've got my new throttle cable here. If you had an old one and you wanted to lube it, you certainly can. You can do the return one. It'll make it a little easier. Just go from the bottom end, because as you can see, the top has those plastics. So just go from the bottom and do the exact same thing. It'll come out there that way. But it's not really needed that much. So, okay, so we paid attention to how we were routed. And on this bike, it was to the right of the number plate bolt. and it came down through the triple clamps. Easy for me to say. Came through here, through this little holder that Yamaha had. So after I put them through there, I want to just bend that back with my finger on top of the radiator. And down in there. Okay, it's cut. All right, we know that the pull part of the cable does not have the adjuster, and we know that that goes in the top. There is only one way it can go in. So go ahead and screw that in there, like so. And as far as the push one, basically it's adjusted from the factory in a pretty neutral position. Any kind of throttle play adjustment is going to be done up here on the top, so you can just leave that where it is, and it goes in here. The throttle cables loop around the wheel. Throttle pulley. You have to be careful that you seat the nut in the right way. It'll only go in one way. Let's put the top in before we get too far here. There you go. The cables are in, they're aligned. Let's tighten the bottom. All right, time to devote our attention to the top. For that smooth feeling factory throttle, we've cleaned the bar. Now let's clean the throttle tube out with some contact cleaner. Spray it down in there. It gets pretty dirty. Now you can use assembly lube for this. I recommend assembly lube. That's what I did when I was a mechanic. But failing that, certainly some Maxima MPPL lube will work. Spray it down in that throttle, and now you're ready to put it on the bar up here. Slowly slide it on. And you can feel it. It's a lot better than what it used to be already. Now, time for the throttle cables. Again, they only go one way. You can see how they butt up against each other there in the housing. So you can basically look at the throttle and realize that one goes in the front and one goes in the back. And it's the only way that the housing itself will go on. You can see the housing fits in like so. There we go, the housing's all together. Before you put the bolts in, you can put this rubber piece on just to kind of hold it together while you dig up for some bolts. Now, I explained going to your local hardware store and getting some 8mm bolts for these screws. We didn't do that, so we're going to have to replace the stock screws back in. Don't tighten them until you have them both in. And then what you want to do, what I do, is take the throttle assembly, push it all the way onto the bar as far as you can, and then back it out maybe a couple millimeters. And what that'll do is prevent the end of the throttle tube from chafing up against the end of the bar and causing stiction. Now, throttle feels pretty smooth. There's a little bit, not enough play in here. I got a little bit, but I need more just from the adjuster. If I run out of room up here in the bar, I can always go down to the bottom by the carburetor, but it's a 250F, this model, so I don't want too much in there. And I'm going to go a little bit more. There we go. Take that. Perfect. I got a little bit of throttle in there, a little bit of play in there. You'll want to give yourself a little more if you have a 450, just because of the nature of how powerful the bike is. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to put this on. Reach down there, bolt it up, put the tank back on, put the seat back on, and I'm ready to rip with a smooth throttle. Alright, that's been this week's Transworld How-To presented by Bike Bandit. Stick around next week. You'll see more of these things, and hopefully you're enjoying them.